Okay.
All right. So just to repeat that last point, I believe that chronic stress is basically the source of all of the common diseases we have now and most of the emotional disorders that we have. If you kind of look backwards at where did this all come from, the symptoms we're dealing with or the diseases we're dealing with, chronic stress is either causing it or aggravating it in a major way. So the way that I approach the paradigm that I use in terms of treating patients and offering strategies to patients is trying to think about chronic stress as how's that playing a role in all of this and what are our options to try to modify that. So a sort of an associated principle is that I believe that the body will fix itself. It will bring the body back into balance when it has the right nutrients and the right building blocks. And it will do that if we can take away the sources of stress. And the sources of stress, as I mentioned before, are physical, emotional, and spiritual. So tonight we're going to be focusing on a subset of the physical sources of stress. So when I'm talking about the things I'm talking about, I'm actually in the back of my mind thinking about how these things that we're dealing with stress the body out and cause a response that sort of tilts the body out of balance and makes us predisposed to disease and causes us not to feel well and not to have high energy levels that I think we're meant to have. So if you kind of look at the major sources of physical health, there's basically three that I look at mostly, which one of them is nutritional. The second was exercise. The third is resting sufficiently. Now you could look at other things. You could tease these apart. I'm lumping them together right now for the purpose of this little discussion. And so tonight we're going to be focusing on how the nutritional stuff plays a role in our body being in balance and controlling the stress response that causes us to develop disease. Because when we are in the state of chronic stress, there are lots of different hormonal changes that cause us to not fight off the development of disease well. It actually affects how our genes express themselves. A lot of different things go wrong when we're in the state of chronic stress. So the components that we're going to be talking about tonight are, I know this is a busy slide, the nutritional components basically are what I would call the four legs of a chair. The first leg of the chair is how to avoid the toxins that are poisoning our body. The second leg is how to fix our body once it's broken from the toxic load. The third leg of the chair is the nutritional supplement strategies that might support this overall goal. And then the fourth leg of the chair is eating in a way that does not increase inflammation. And so those are the things that I'm going to be talking about. The rest of the things that I'll be sharing about. I'm happy to answer questions on the other things if you had one that popped to mind. But basically, all that other stuff is the context for what we're talking about tonight, which is just looking, sort of honing down and looking at what in our nutritional approach to life, which is a subset of the physical approach to life, which is a subset of the holistic approach to life. What of this stuff can I control? What can I change that will help me to be healthier or recover my health if I have lost it? So the first one of these was the toxins that we are exposed to, and where are they coming from in the food and other sources. So I'm going to focus on just a couple of things of many that we could look at, but the ones that are perhaps the most hidden from us, but more almost ubiquitous, are the ones I'm going to focus on. So the first one is a chemical that is called glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the herbicide called Roundup. So you all probably have heard of Roundup. And because you live in St. Louis, you know of Monsanto, and Monsanto's who makes the this chemical, this glyphosate, and manufactures Roundup. So glyphosate was originally developed as an antibiotic, and then it never was used as an antibiotic. It was first used as an herbicide. And the reason it works so well as an herbicide, meaning a plant killer, is because it disrupts the same chemical pathways in the plants that it does in bacteria. And so it does a good job of killing bacteria in general. Almost all bacteria are able to be killed by this chemical, and it disrupts some key pathways in plants, and all plants are susceptible to this chemical. It's not just a weed killer, it's a plant killer. So I want to explain a little bit about how this chemical has come to be so pervasive in our environment, and then what it does to our bodies. So first of all, it became widely used as a weed killer for backyard gardeners. And after Monsanto essentially saturated the market for that, they broadened or created a new market by developing what are called GMO foods. So GMO foods means genetically modified organisms. And the initial GMO foods inserted a gene from an insect that made that plant resistant to Roundup killing it, specifically glyphosate killing it. So that was the genetic modification. And so the marketing ploy was that they would be able to spray this herbicide on the crop, which would kill all the weeds and not kill the crop. So if corn was your plant and you inserted the gene into it, then you could spray as much of this weed killer that you wanted, and the idea was that it wouldn't damage the corn. And so they were able to get the government to believe that this was totally harmless to humans. And so it's been widely embraced in the food industry, by the farming industry, and many, many crops now are GMO crops. Corn, almost all of the corn in the United States is GMO. All of the soy is GMO. A lot of the sugar beets are GMO. Almost all of the alfalfa is GMO, and because the cows eat alfalfa, most of the cows that grow up in feedlots, they're full of this GMO substance, and so plus they're full of this GMO genetic variant in their food supply, but they're also full of this glyphosate, or they have this glyphosate in them. And then what happens is we eat that stuff. Now, the reason that the food industry, or that Monsanto is able to get approval for glyphosate being safe, is because it technically doesn't show critical damage to our cells. It doesn't kill individual human cells, but what it does do is that it totally disrupts the bacterial balance in the GI tract, which is called the biome. And the biome is a critical part of our immune system. And the reason that it's a critical part, I'll get to in a moment. But the second thing that this chemical does, which is very disruptive to the human body, is that it destroys the connection between the cells in the small bowel. So it may not kill the small bowel cells, but it kills it disrupts the connection between them. So these connections are called tight junctions, and they normally function to keep nutrients from to keep the wrong nutrients from getting through the small bowel into the body. And only the right nutrients are generally able to get through this network of small bowel cells. But when the junctions are destroyed, then they get really bad at deciding what's supposed to get through and what's not. And we call that a leaky gut when you've got that, because chemicals are getting through that aren't supposed to get through, including different kinds of proteins, sizes. The protein sizes are wrong. Different parts of food get through that normally wouldn't have gotten through unless they were more digested. Chemicals that would have been totally excluded are able to get through. And sitting right behind the small bowel cells is a significant part of your immune system. And so your immune system then is contacting all of this junk that's getting through the small bowel filter. Now, the small bowel filter is literally 1 cell thick. That's about the size of half a hair in diameter. And it has about the surface area of 1 to 2 tennis courts. So we're talking about a continuous membrane when it's functional that doesn't let anything through that's not supposed to get through, and does let the nutrients through that are supposed to get through. And it is disrupted severely by this chemical glyphosate. So once that starts to happen, the glyphosate gets through also, and then it is able to grab onto heavy metals, and it literally transports heavy metals to the brain and other organs. And these connections between cells that exist at the small bowel level also exist at the brain level. So it literally makes our brain leaky for these same substances getting through. So the explosion of neurological conditions that are affecting both children with the autism spectrum disorders, and on the other end of the spectrum, the explosion of Alzheimer's disease is undoubtedly linked to this chemical and its effect. Now, this chemical and its effect is not the only factor. It's one of probably 3 or 4 factors, but because it's still considered safe, it's widely used and people are being exposed to it. And unless you are taking steps to try to limit it, you're being exposed to a lot of it every day. Now, even if you decided to try to eliminate it completely, you could not at this point, because so much of the water supply in the United States has been affected by this chemical. We use it more than any other country in the world by a long shot. So our water supply is affected by it. Our food supply is drastically affected by it. And it's a major player in disease because of its effect on what I just described to you. Now, the second broad group of chemicals that I just want to touch on are the pesticides. And the pesticides have, obviously they kill the bugs that are trying to eat the plants, and they are also on the food that we're eating in large part because of the fact that most farms use these kind of chemicals a lot. And unless you're eating organic, you're not limiting these chemicals at all. And in many cases, these chemicals are integrated into the food. You can't wash them off. So the pesticides have then not similar, but they have different kinds of toxicity to the bacteria in the small bowel. And then they can get through because the glyphosate has already destroyed or damaged this lining in the small bowel. So pesticides are getting through into us that probably would have been held back to some extent by the small bowel, but it's been disabled to some extent. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that's out there. Any kind of a artificial chemical essentially is going to be then contributing to the toxic load in our body. And so the first leg of the chair is to try to limit this toxic exposure. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to be committed to eating organic everything if you really want to limit these chemicals getting into you and damaging your body and your children's body. The second thing is to try to limit GMO foods. Now, I'm going to kind of make an aside here real quickly. A lot of glyphosate is now being sprayed on wheat in the United States, and wheat is not a GMO food. It's not been genetically modified. What they do is they spray the glyphosate on the wheat right at the end of the growing season, which causes 2 things. It causes kind of a last gasp of more wheat berry production as the plant is dying, and it also then desiccates the plant and makes it easier to harvest. So the problem is, this is not being done in all wheat fields, but it's being done in a lot of them, and all of that wheat gets lumped together. So when you eat your bread or whatever is made from wheat, you don't know whether it's had glyphosate sprayed on it, but the chances are pretty good that it has. And I believe, and many who have studied this subject believe, that the explosion of gluten sensitivity is actually because of the glyphosate, because glyphosate is actually built off of an amino acid that is actually part of the gluten molecule. So we think that glyphosate is actually being integrated into the gluten molecules, and then the body sees that this is a distorted gluten molecule, and then it attacks it. And we know that at least 60 to 70% of people in the United States have antibodies to gluten. Even if you're not sick from gluten, about 60 to 70% of people have antibodies against gluten. So your immune system is responding to it whether you feel it or not. And a lot of times when the immune system does that, there are innocent bystanders, so to speak, inside your body. So to take it a step further, if you really want to be careful in terms of limiting these chemical exposures, then my recommendation is to get organic flour and make your own bread products rather than to buy them pre-made, because otherwise you're pretty much assured that you're going to get some significant glyphosate exposure from the wheat that's currently available in the United States. Now, that's not true around the world, but we're talking about right here in the United States. And until the winds shift and public pressure pushes people away from these types of farming techniques, these are the kind of chemicals that you're ingesting on a daily basis, the first leg of the stool. Now, why is that critical? Because we now know that the bacteria that live in your small bowel contribute a substantial part of something that's called microRNA, which are the major signalers to your DNA to tell your DNA what to do. And there's some very specific signals that are supposed to be coming from your gut, and it's a very distorted signal when the wrong bacteria have been wiped out and other bacteria have taken their place. So the reason this is important is because in the human body, our genome is different than most other organisms. We should have over 200,000 genes if it was one gene, one protein, or one gene, one enzyme, but we only have about 17 to 20,000 genes. And the reason that's significant is that it's this microRNA that tells the different genes or parts of genes to make different things. So the ability for the microRNA to talk to our genome and tell it what to do throughout the entire body is affected when you damage the biome, which all of this stuff I've just been telling you about badly damages the biome. It's not a trivial effect. So again, leg number one of the stool or the chair.
I'm gonna pester you a minute. You can hear me now?
Yep.
First, I just want to, if you have any questions, but you're talking about, okay, we've damaged the microbiome, and I understand all. I've heard this a dozen times, so I kind of got it. So I'm gonna try to translate a couple of these things. But so what? What does that mean to me? Okay, so and I know the answer, because what excites me about this, once you get it, it's 4 legs. Whatever health concern you have or you're talking to somebody about, I don't care what it is, it's here. Okay, so we're talking about inflammation, issues with inflammation and pain. I mean, go on. I mean, the ability to control weight, mental capacity, energy levels. What else can you throw in there?
Well, the biome. The other thing,
brain. It's like a second brain for your body, right?
It's actually more than that. It is not only a second brain, but it actually tells the first brain what to do a lot of times. And the normal microbiome has a very sophisticated communication network. The bacteria talk to each other in ways that are beyond description. It is so fast. The communication is so fast between bacteria. Because of these substances that are called humic acids that are normally supposed to be in our food but have been destroyed by the chemical crop growing that damages the bacteria in the soil. So the biome of the soil is as important as the biome in our gut. And because the biome of the soil has been destroyed, the plants don't absorb these critical humic acids, which, if they're present and the right balance in the gut, there's instantaneous communication between bacteria all throughout the gut. They talk to each other real fast, and then they talk to the brain real fast.
Right.
And that's disrupted when that communication system is disrupted when you when you have these chemicals coming in and damaging the biome. So the ability of the gut to talk to the brain is dramatically affected, and the brain responds with an inflammatory response. It responds with a stress response. And instead of rest and digest signal, you get a stress response. You get the fight or flight response from the brain instead of the rest and digest signal that the gut would be calling for, but it doesn't get it because it can't signal back up the vagus nerve to the brain, hey, it's time to digest the food. Right. So it doesn't send the signal back down.
All right. I'm going to let you go in a second. I just want to comment again because this is a lot of information, but this covers everything health-wise. And what he said so far, if you're listening, it's like, crap, what am I going to do? Because it's in everything, and it is in everything. And so far where we are, it sounds like we're screwed. And in some ways we are. But the thing is there are simple things that he's going to show you in a little bit that can actually, in a fairly short amount of time, restore the health of the gut biome. So we're going to get to that. So there's a happy ending here. Okay. So anyway.
Yeah. So it's time. Yeah, everybody just go out and.
All right. All right. So anything else before I shut him off or shut this off? Okay. Well, go ahead, Doc.
Okay. So I know there's a lot of technical stuff, but the take-home message is, if you let your biome get destroyed, you cannot be healthy. It's not possible to be healthy with a destroyed biome. You will suffer consequences, and so will your family. And Monsanto knows this. Okay, so this isn't news to their scientists. This is stuff that good scientists have known for years now, but the evidence has been not out there for a long time. So this is stuff where you need to take responsibility for yourself and your family if you want to be as healthy as possible, and if you want to minimize the risk of disease. For instance, we know that just different species that live in the biome will, if they're not there, that alone will increase your risk of cancer. So there's really, really delicate balances that we want to try to maintain. So the second leg of the chair was, how do you repair this when the damage is ongoing? And so the thing that I recommend to people is to consume probiotic-rich foods as opposed to probiotic capsules. Now, probiotic capsules aren't bad, but they are insufficient because they're what we would call a monoculture. There's one or two different species inside of a typical capsule, and we've just succeeded in wiping out hundreds, maybe thousands of species by these chemicals. And so if we're going to try to repair things, then we need something that more approximates what we started with before we damaged it. Now, this is a dilemma that I deal with all the time, because every time I treat a patient with an antibiotic, I know I'm destroying their biome, and I'm damaging their biome in a way that's going to take them weeks and months to recover, to get back to balance, unless they are very proactive by doing the strategies that I recommend with as far as consuming what we call fermented foods. So fermented foods are foods that still have, they were not only fermented as part of the process of preservation, but they still have active cultures in them. So there aren't very many of those left in our food supply anymore, but it used to be that that's how humans preserve their food. We fermented it. And so that's where sauerkraut came from. And sauerkraut was and still is a staple, but it used to be like one of the major staples in all around the world. The Romans carried huge kegs of sauerkraut wherever their armies went. And even Genghis Khan, their convoys had sauerkraut as part of a way to feed their armies. So why is that? Because it's basically a superfood. It's cabbage, which is one of the most powerful foods that we can have, that has been pre-digested with fermenting bacteria, and now it's got all these probiotic bacteria in it. So sauerkraut or other fermented vegetables is one group of foods that we can consume on a regular basis that helps to repopulate the gut with good bacteria. The second food that I recommend is called kefir, which is fermented milk, which is very different from soured milk. So sour milk is basically what happens if you don't add kefirine bacteria. So kefir bacteria are a particular set of species that will ferment the milk and create a very healthy drink where the lactose has been consumed, and most, if not all, the casein molecules, which is the main irritant protein in milk, that's been consumed. And in its place, you've got a lot of probiotic bacteria. And then the third major group that I recommend is the organic apple cider vinegars, which have completely different species in them, very complementary to the kefir. So just consuming these three kinds of foods on a regular basis is a very simple and powerful way to repopulate your GI tract with good bacteria. Now, the reason that that just taking a probiotic capsule is insufficient is because there's so many of the good bacteria have been eliminated, whereas when you're doing this, you're resupplying dozens of different species and subspecies. And also there's a secondary benefit, which is that one of the species that's in the organic vinegar, which is called Acetobacter, actually consumes glyphosate. So it eats the glyphosate, it's not killed by it. So if you are trying to limit glyphosate and not eating lots of foods that have high amounts of it, then if there's a more limited amount and you're consuming the organic vinegar on a regular basis in a dilute form, of course, then that's going to help to consume the glyphosate that is getting through and limit your exposure to that chemical. The second thing is the bacteria that are in the kefir actually like to eat pesticides. So again, that's another whole group of chemicals. Those chemicals can be consumed by the probiotic bacteria that are in kefir. So not only are you repopulating the good bacteria into the gut, you're actually consuming some of the chemicals that are causing the problem in the first place. Some people wonder about yogurt. It's okay. It's not as good as a probiotic source in terms of density of probiotic bacteria, but it's good and complementary to kefir. It's different species. So all of these are these four things are basically the sources for where you can get active cultures in the current American food supply that I'm aware of. Everything else pretty much has been sterilized, and some of these things you need to make at home if you want to get the best version of them. But a lot of the stores now are selling kefir. Many of them sell organic apple cider vinegar, and so it's simple to use these on a regular basis, which I recommend for patients who are trying to recover health once they've lost it. So any questions on that one, Jim? So no questions. So I'll move on to the.
Hey, sorry about that. I had it muted. Now can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Sorry, we were asking a question to a blinking light. It didn't work. So,
okay.
She asked, what quantities of these items do you recommend, of the vinegar and the kefir and sauerkraut and such?
Yeah, so there aren't any scientific studies on any of this stuff. So a lot of it is well, it's all anecdotal, but it's anecdotal based on generations of experience. So the brand of organic vinegar that I recommend that you get is Bragg's. And that's been a family business for multiple generations. And they have sort of paid attention to how people do with this. And their recommendation is a tablespoon in dilute water 3 times a day. You can dress it up with a little bit of honey, put some cinnamon in it. You can almost make it taste like apple cider if you want to. I don't mind the taste of it, so I just drink it dilute, but as it is. Some people turn up their nose at it, but I would say that 100% of patients who choose to take it when I recommend it for a medical issue that I know is related to their gut being out of balance, I would say that 100% of them get better. So it's incredible how rapidly people get better when they do that. And it's such a simple thing. So it's also a good maintenance strategy, because even if you're trying to limit chemical exposure, you're still going to get it in your water supply. We breathe it in the air, and all of that stuff is damaging to the gut bacteria. So my recommendation is that we should be in a state of continuously replenishing the good bacteria in our gut. And that's actually how our ancestors lived until the advent of artificial preservatives. Until then, we used these kind of strategies to preserve a lot of the foods that we ate. In fact, I have patients that can remember that.
How about the kefir? Just what's your routine on the kefir?
Well, we make our own kefir, so my routine is a little bit different than somebody that might buy it, but I consume it twice a day. I recommend at least 4 ounces twice a day. If you're serious about replenishing bacteria, and you can definitely drink more of it if you want to. And if you're milk sensitive, you'll discover that you can actually consume kefir most of the time. I know people that are very milk sensitive who can drink kefir that is what we call double kefir, which is something you have to do at home. Takes an extra day, but it really completely digests the casein proteins in milk. So it becomes a very powerful drink instead of something that upsets your stomach. So kefir a couple of times a day is a good idea, but at least some a day. I mean, nobody's done the research. These are just ideas that I have developed as I've observed patients have to deal with antibiotic exposure. Because, as an aside, because we see so much Lyme disease where I live now, we have many patients who are on antibiotics for weeks or months, and we're trying to help them restore their gut or keep it functional because they're on an antibiotic for months. That's really hard to keep them healthy. And so I've learned kind of what we have to do to keep them able to continue taking the antibiotic. So anyway, that's what I would suggest. Is the organic vinegar would be a tablespoon in at least 4 ounces of water before meals, ideally, but anytime is fine. Okay. And at least 3 times a day. I
always say that word wrong. Kombucha? Kombucha. What about kombucha?
Some people really like it. My wife really likes it. I think it adds to this, but I think it, as a probiotic source, I'm less impressed with it than these other things.
Yeah,
it's more of a pop drink, I think, but especially stuff that's sold in stores.
I know your favorite is homemade, and I made some and brought it. So if anybody wants to try it, I'll pour some glasses while he's talking, and let's try it. But do you have a favorite store-bought brand of kefir? I know you make your own.
No,
okay.
I don't know the different brands enough to know. I send people off. What I tell them is that, look, try to drink the kefir. If you like it, I promise you that your homemade stuff will taste twice as good or better. So some people will go on and start to drink that. Just depends on how badly they want to get better.
Right. It's not hard to make. It's a habit. I brought some, and I even thought if people are interested in either the next one or the one after, I'll make it right here for you. I'll show you how. And then I'll tell you where I got my kefir grains. I don't have enough to share with everybody. I could share a couple, but I really think, I'm not kidding. He knows a story about Claire. The vinegar and the kefir are the 2 primary things we focused on. And she quit. She was stressing over her gluten-free diet and making life miserable. And doing it the hard way didn't work, and doing it the easy way worked. And I'm amazed at this gut health thing. I've heard about it, but I didn't realize how real this is. It's real. The world needs to know about it. So anyway, any other questions?
Does he ever ferment his own foods?
What foods do you guys ferment, if any, on your own?
Just vegetables. You can do a lot of different variations on the vegetable fermentation. In fact, I remember having a conversation with an elderly gentleman, a patient who had actually emigrated from Italy, and he could remember when his town where he lived, at the end of the growing season, they had one big pot that the whole town would throw their vegetables into to ferment before winter came, and that would be their fermenting vegetables that would serve the whole town for the whole winter. That's how they preserved their vegetables. They just fermented them all. So you can literally ferment anything with the sauerkraut with the cabbage as the base, but so there's a lot of variations. If you look at sauerkraut, there's a lot of variations around the world, but virtually every culture has a sauerkraut recipe because they know what, I mean, they just learned through experience, hey, we eat this stuff, we stay healthy.
Wow.
And so you can throw peppers in, you can throw onions and garlic in, and anything else you want to, if you want to. And you can, like, if you make sauerkraut in small amounts, like a quart jar, you can have sauerkraut in a week. So it's not like it has to sit down in your basement in a big crock for a month. And you can have you can literally have 4 different types of sauerkraut fermenting at the same time. Once it's done, you can just set it in the refrigerator. It's good for months there. And just, experiment with it. And there's a lot of people into this type of living that are very active on the internet. They're passionate bloggers, so you can learn a lot about just by starting to look around, and you'll find a lot of good information.
Well, keep on rolling, Doc.
Okay, so the third leg of the chair is, let's see here, is the nutrition. Back to this card, my high tech. The third leg of the chair is nutritional supplementation, and one of the reasons that I integrate that is because I started to recommend nutritional supplementation in the around 1993 or so, and what I've discovered over the years is that people that use broad spectrum nutritional supplementation strategies are healthier than those that don't. And I have patients who've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I can see a divergence in how people are. And I know that in my own life and my family's life also. So when I first started in medicine, when I was in medical school, residency, first 10 years of medicine, I believed that all nutritional supplements were a waste of time and money and possibly harmful. But then one of my heroes, Dr. Kenneth Cooper, I heard him lecture on the need to supplement high doses of different antioxidants. And I thought this was heresy being preached, but because I believed in him, he's basically the founder of the aerobics movement. He's a cardiologist from Dallas, Texas. And he was very persuasive in his speaking, and he had a lot of research. Basically led me to 3 years of doing my own research in terms of reading the basic science that was being done. And I became convinced that there was a lot to what he was saying. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that the probability was high that we are missing multiple significant micronutrients and that there was a benefit for significant antioxidant supplementation. The thing that I was most concerned about was providing a quality product to patients, because I knew that the industry was well known for poor quality control. So I spent quite a bit of time looking for companies that had what I would call pharmaceutical grade quality control, and I eventually settled on a company by the name of USANA Health Sciences. I started to recommend it to my family members and to a couple of patients just to kind of test it. And the results were very consistent, and people felt a lot better. And one of my family members who had been critically ill for a year recovered almost miraculously. And so I definitely got my attention. And over the years, I have been continuing to recommend this supplement to people when they're dealing with a critical illness for which there is not a medical treatment. I'll mention this as an option. And most patients who take it feel better and do better. So as I've thought about this model of the whole person health approach and the eating in a way that helps the body repair itself, I've come to recognize that one of the reasons this nutritional supplement strategy works is that we're deficient in so many key nutrients. Back when we thought that we got everything from our food, there really weren't any studies done to prove the point. It was just assumed. But the more nutrients that we actually start measuring, the more we're confirming that people are severely deficient. For instance, almost everybody in this part of the world is vitamin D deficient severely. And recent research on a vitamin that's called vitamin K2, which is emerging as one of the most critical nutrients. 90% of the American population is significantly deficient. And other research that looks at nutrient levels inside the cells show that multiple people who think they're in good health have significant deficiencies inside their cells. So I think that the body's ability to fix itself is dependent on having the right tools to build itself, to rebuild the cells. So the cells are always trying to fix themselves, but they're also replacing themselves. And every time they divide, they need a whole bunch of nutrients to build the new cell. And if they don't have them, they'll plug in what they've got. And I tell patients, look, your body would prefer to build something made out of bricks and mortar, but if all you give it is sticks and mud, that's what it's going to use. And so we give our bodies insufficient nutrients much of the time, and we get cells that are relatively dysfunctional. Now, one of the most exciting bits of research that's emerging is that it's not the antioxidants that we take that are important, it's the antioxidants that we make that are important. And our cells make some very, very potent antioxidants. They're 100 times or more potent than anything that we can take, but our ability to make those antioxidants in structures called the mitochondria degrades rapidly as we get older, and even more rapidly when we're exposed to all these toxins. And there are specific nutrients that signal the mitochondria in our cells to be healthy, to replace themselves in a healthy way, and to make these super potent antioxidants inside the cells for us. So I've come to believe even more in the importance of supplementation for people that want to either recover their health or be more proactive and maintain their health. So what would happen if somebody did the first 2 legs and didn't do the 3rd leg? Well, they'd probably still be way healthier than the average person in the United States. But in my experience, the folks that do that 3rd leg are even more robustly healthy. And most of them will tell me that they can feel a difference, and they will feel a difference for as long as they maintain the healthy lifestyle. So then the 4th leg of the chair is what I would call eating in a way that does not provoke the inflammatory response. And there's lots of different things that we could talk about that. Obviously, we've already addressed it in terms of the toxins, because all of those provoke the inflammatory response. But there's 2 kinds of foods that we eat that are particularly bad in provoking inflammation. And the first way that we eat is called high glycemic eating. So when we eat foods that are turned to sugar quickly, the body responds by pumping out a bunch of insulin. And when it does that, and it does that over and over and over again, it creates inflammation in the body. The insulin itself rises to levels that cause inflammation. And as we do this over and over again, the insulin levels stay high. And then there's this continuous inflammation going on that is being caused by the insulin that we made because of how we ate. And so avoiding eating high glycemic foods as the main source of our food is the most important part of that strategy. So what are the high glycemic foods? Grains, potatoes, rice, and sugar. So does that mean you can't ever eat them? No, it's not what I'm saying, but you don't want them to be the main part of what you're eating. And for reasons we've already talked about, you might want to limit grains unless you can guarantee that you're eating organic grains and they haven't been polluted by the glyphosate. So if you're already overweight, then you're in a state where your body is really super sensitive to the insulin. And when you eat high glycemic foods, it triggers the body and tells it to store fat. But it's also telling the body to be inflamed, because that's what insulin at high levels does. The other food source for this inflammatory response are bad fats. So fats are really critical for the body. There are essential fats that we need. And if we don't have them, our body doesn't function well. And most people are deficient in the essential fats. And they tend to have a lot more of the non-essential fats. And there's 2 main ones that we have. And the first one are damaged omega-6 fats. And the second one are called trans fats. So omega-6 fats are the kind of fats that are found in the vegetable oils that we use for cooking. And the reason that they're bad is because the extraction method caused them to be damaged, and so in their damaged form, they cause an inflammation response. So it's not that these foods themselves would be bad, it's just that the extraction method caused them to be damaged. So my recommendation for people who are trying to recover their health is to completely avoid vegetable oils and to use other sources of oil instead that are not damaged, olive oil being, extra virgin olive oil being chief among those. The second fat that is becoming less used now, but still used a lot by food industry, are the trans fats. These are man-made artificial fats that definitely provoke a severe inflammatory reaction, and they get plugged into the body in places where they don't belong when the body doesn't have the right fat to put there. So your body's always plugging fats into parts of the cell, and if it doesn't have the right one, it will use the wrong one to make sure that that hole is plugged. So cutting out the trans fats are the second part of the decreasing the inflammation from the way we're eating. So that's basically the fourth leg of the chair is eating in a way that doesn't provoke inflammation, and by virtue of sort of by the default is then you're eating more of the good stuff once you cut out stuff that's provoking inflammation. And so the lower glycemic carbs would be the fruits and vegetables. You can pretty much eat them in abundance. So there's nothing new and breakthrough about eating this way. It's just that the science behind it is you're trying to avoid inflammation. That's the why of it. That's why you don't want to have a plate full of potatoes as your meal, because it's going to provoke a big insulin response, because potatoes, grains, they're all turned to sugar rapidly in the body. So these are the four legs of the stool that have to do with the nutritional part of physical health. So obviously there's other things that we could talk about that are part of a wellness paradigm. And so we just sort of tuned into this little part right here, but it's critical, it's foundational. And I would argue is the foundation. If you don't do that right, the other stuff isn't going to work. The other stuff, as critical as it is, will not work if you don't do this part right. And this is one reason why a lot of people don't feel well and they stay feeling ill all of the time, no matter what. And that's why medicines don't work, because they're not addressing the real issue, which is the gut's been all messed up. And there's a lot of inflammation going on that is being caused by all of the things I've mentioned. So that's my presentation. Happy to entertain any questions if you have any.
I have some questions. What questions do we have?
Is it actually kind of fish? You know that?
You talk about fish and potentially fish oils, Doc. What do you got to say about that?
So fish as a protein source, is that what the question is, or as?
Yes, fish in general.
Fish,
Eating fish is a main part of your diet.
Yeah, so fish are generally healthy if they weren't so polluted. So like where I live, you know, I live where you could fish and live off trout for, you know, for several months out of the year, but they're so polluted that the recommendation is to don't eat more than 3 trout a week. Well, I don't know where they got with that. And people go up to Lake Erie to go fishing, and there's a similar kind of recommendation of how many fish you can eat before you kill yourself from the fish. So, so if you can eat clean fish, then it's a great food. But the problem is a lot of it's polluted, and the farmed fish is really bad. So I would avoid farmed fish like the plague. But if you're going to consume fish oil, very, very helpful. But the problem is, again, almost all the fish oil on the market is polluted by heavy metals. In fact, the state of California sued almost all of the major fish oil producers because of not labeling that they had heavy metal contamination. And so USANA does have a very clean fish oil. It has been scrubbed completely of all heavy metals, and it even has been scrubbed from iodine. So if a person was iodine sensitive, they could still consume their fish oil. So fish is great, but you need to get clean fish, and that's hard to do.
Wow.
What about tablets for the sauerkraut and the stuff that's in farms?
You mean, can we do something besides eating sauerkraut?
Yeah, no, can they make it like
He was asking if you could buy tablets or powdered sauerkraut.
Oh, I'm sure there's a market for it. I wouldn't advise it though.
It's really not that hard. I mean, we can talk more about this in a bit, but like I have a quart jar, and you probably have a shot glass at home. But so I figured out his ratios of a teaspoon, and so I have a quart jar, and I know where to pour it into the shot glass. I dump it in there, and I keep it on my desk, and I just sip my vinegar, apple cider vinegar, organic, and just have it there and drink. And it's not hard to drink a quart or so a day of that stuff. And for me, I don't mind the taste. Some people do. Like you said, you can add stevia or cinnamon or other things you can do, but it doesn't bother me. Now, Doc, I talked to a chiropractor the other day who takes and chugs a shot glass of it with a water chaser. And I said, aren't you worried about your teeth? He said, no, I throw it all the way in the back of my throat, swallow it, and then drink a big shot of water. Does that sound like a good idea to you, or not so much?
Not so much.
He told me that's what he was doing, and I go, that's hilarious. I don't know why, but
well, the reason you wouldn't want to do that is that the pH of the organic vinegar is the same pH as your stomach acid, so you're purposely exposing your esophagus to a high acid substance. It's like having reverse acid reflux.
that's what I thought. So
I don't see a value in it when you can dilute it.
I'm gonna share that with him. I'll see him again soon, but I'll share that with him. So diluting it and having that on hand, and then the kefir, I will admit, it took me probably 2 months to figure out how to get a consistent product, and I think I could show somebody now how to get a more consistent product. But I make 3 quarts at a time. The kefir grains are like a little pet. You have to keep it alive. Okay. You got
your pet.
You got to pet, and they grow too. Okay, so as these grains grow, you're gonna have extra to give away. Or what I do is I eat them. I just eat the grains. But and so if you have the discipline to do those 2 things, spend a few minutes a day, they're there, and it tastes good. I'll share some with you in a minute. But he's got me convinced that having a potent form of a wide variety of bacteria, and then he even recommends letting it sit out to open air to gather bacteria from the air. So you're actually creating new variants of bacteria all the time. It sounds weird, but it tastes good.
So for everybody's purpose, what milk do you use?
Okay, for a whole bunch of reasons, it needs to be organic, grass-fed, whole milk. And he'll share with you in a minute, but one of the worst drinks you can drink is skim milk. If you're trying to lose weight, you're shooting yourself in the foot. If you're trying to be healthy, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And cows are given a lot of antibiotics because it's a lot cheaper to feed the cows antibiotics than to deal with them if they have other problems. So the one I have is a shoot. I'll get it for you the next time. When I make it, I'll bring it. But it says organic, and it says grass milk on it. It says certified grass fed. Has a big picture of a cow's face on it. Sells out the minute it comes into the stores.
Almond milk.
The almond milk.
For kefirine,
I guess what
Just drinking.
for drinking.
it's all right. I mean, it's a good way to get some of the nutrients that are in almonds, but I don't advise it because they add extra calcium to the almond milk. If coconut milk doesn't have anything added to it, doesn't have calcium added to it as far as I know, but almond milk does, and I'm opposed to using extra calcium because if you get your vitamin D levels correct, then you absorb calcium very well from your food. And extra calcium, the body really doesn't know what to do with it. So unless your vitamin K2 levels are really good, you're going to calcify soft tissue with that extra calcium.
So that was the other reason you want grass-fed dairy products. There is a source of K2 in grass-fed dairy, right, Doc? Am I saying that right?
Yes, probably. I
Okay.
mean, nobody's done the research, but the problem is we don't have, let me rephrase that. There's a lot of variation, depends on what the grass actually was. When Weston Price did the research 50 or 70 years ago, different regions of the country had different amounts of K2 in what was later determined to be K2 in the dairy products. So there is some, but it varies from place to place, time of the year, things like that. That's one of the reasons why, if you have a health reason, K2 supplementation is probably a good idea. But yeah, the sources of K2, there's two main sources that we consume that are abbreviated MK4 and MK7. So MK4 comes from critters, and that would be eggs and from chickens that are range fed, and then dairy products from cows would have K2 in it. That's the MK4 version.
And so you're getting a piece of this story. Like, I know the background. We can't spend all day on this stuff. But when he first told me the story of K2, I about fell out of my chair. First of all, I never really paid any attention to it. Second, not all multivitamins or broad spectrum vitamins, I don't care how much money you're paying, contain any K2. So look.
Yeah, I think only USANA does right now.
Yeah, only USANA. USANA has K2 in there. And we don't know, all honesty, what the optimal amounts are and all that neat stuff. But the key here is we know that it has a direct correlation to the performance of D, calcium, and A.
Yeah, so just real briefly, vitamin D is critical for lots of different systems. And one of the things it does is makes the body start to absorb calcium appropriately from the food. When you're D deficient, you don't absorb calcium well, which is probably one of the reasons that huge amounts of calcium supplementation was so popular for treating osteoporosis 30 years ago, because they didn't know that everybody was severely D deficient. Once you fix the D deficiency, you're absorbing plenty of calcium, but then the body doesn't know where to put the calcium if it is K2 deficient, which 90% of people in the United States are. So the vitamin K2 activates proteins that tells the body where to put the calcium.
So what happens if what happens with that the point is the outcome of that calcium without the K2 present is, what's the downside?
Well, so the main place the calcium is supposed to go, as everybody knows, is your bones and your teeth. So what happens is that it will calcify other soft tissue, and most critically, it will calcify arteries. So one of the reasons that we have hardening of the arteries is because of vitamin K2 deficiency. And I had mentioned a study that was done a couple years ago to Jim that men in a particular northern European country that consumed the highest amounts of vitamin K2 in their diet had 1/2 the heart attack rates of men that consumed the lowest amount of K2. So we're talking about a single nutrient that cuts heart attacks in half versus a medicine like a statin that might decrease 1 out of 150. So we're talking about something much, much more powerful, simple to replace once you know what to do about it. You can get a significant amount from your food, but I do recommend, when people have significant reason they want to be sure, to supplement it also, because it's such a critical vitamin.
Anyway?
I got a question. I'm seeing more stuff in the stores, like with chicken in particular, where it'll say, it doesn't say organic, but it says natural and vegetarian, or no antibiotics, no hormones, no all that stuff, but it doesn't say organic. And they'll say even like free range, but it doesn't say organic. It even says vegetarian, but vegetarian fed.
Can you hear that, Doc?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I have to sort of I'm not going to be real helpful on that one, because I don't even know if organic designation is used on chicken anywhere. But if it's got those other words, that's always a helpful sign. So you're looking for range-fed, no antibiotics. You know, those phrases are the keys.
And it makes it hard. I've
I don't
noticed.
know if organic applied or not.
I've noticed the same thing, especially on eggs. Like in the store, in the egg section, you'll have one that says, you know, range-free chickens, but it doesn't say organic. It doesn't say antibiotic-free. It doesn't say. Then you have one over here that says, it'll say organic,
Right.
but you don't know if it's range-fed or what it's eating. I mean, it's just it's really hard.
Yeah, the reason, if you can find something that says organic, that's going to definitely be better, because the implication would be, assuming that it's an accurate label, is the implication would be that it wasn't fed something that had glyphosate in it.
Okay.
That would be the implication.
So we drink a lot of milk, but we do buy skim milk. I might point that out.
Well, we'll ensure why in a minute, because somebody asked that last time, and I didn't know.
And what kind of milk should you be buying if you're just buying?
Okay. They currently drink skim milk, and she was asking what milk should they be drinking and what type.
Well, skim milk is kind of the most processed of the milks. So the more you process foods, generally the more you damage them, first of all. Second of all, it's actually a higher glycemic food than whole milk because all the fat's been stripped out of it. And third of all, if you actually look at this, at conditions, especially for children, like asthma, the higher fat milks correlate with lower asthma rates, for instance. So the fats are important for our body, and the amount of fat that's in milk is not like a huge amount, but it does represent the natural version of that food. So you're taking something that's naturally this way and then modifying it. So you have to process it to modify it. And processing almost always damages things. But the fats are actually good for you. As long as the key here is that it depends on what the cow has been eating. So if the cow is range-fed, then the fats are good, and they're going to have significant amounts of omega-3 fatty acids in them. If the cow is grain-fed, then it's going to have no omega-3 fatty acids in it. So it depends on what the cow's been eating. If it's eating what it's been designed to eat, which is grass and other foods like that, then its meat has omega-3 fatty acids in it, and its dairy products have omega-3 in it, in addition to the other fats. There are a lot of good fats, very helpful fats in milk. It's just that if it's been fed the wrong food, then it's not as good for you. But even if it's been fed the wrong food, they're not harmful as we've been led to believe. Those studies that supposedly show damage from saturated fats are very confounded. I won't go into too much detail, just to say there's a lot of bias in how they were put together. I don't think that research supports it any more than it supports that eggs are bad for you. Which I think people are starting to accept that eggs are okay.
What else you got?
Does it affect your fertility?
Fertility issues.
All of the things I just talked about are critical for fertility, and we actually have an online program for infertility and for healthy pregnancy, and it focuses on stress reduction primarily, but the nutritional part of it is what I just talked about tonight, because these things dramatically affect fertility, especially the GMOs. So one of the claims for Monsanto is that GMOs are safe, but the animal studies are actually quite devastating. If you look at rodents by 2 to 3 generations out, you start to see significant loss of baby rodents, whatever it is, and same thing happens in cows. So 2 to 3 generations out, you start to see loss of calves. And we aren't 2 to 3 generations out yet for people. It's going to take a while to see the full effect. But, you know, there's quite a few anecdotes out there about GMO and human fertility. There's not research, unfortunately. As is true of a lot of things, they get foisted on the population as a grand experiment that makes a lot of money for the food companies, but aren't healthy for us. So I would avoid GMO like the plague for a lot of reasons, but if fertility was an issue, I definitely would avoid it.
And the need to have extremely healthy gut biome if you're trying to become pregnant or are pregnant.
Yeah, I think it's all tied together for reasons that we've talked about. The way the biome talks to the rest of our body, just the discovery of how microRNA, which are little genetic signalers, 1/3 of it that signals our body what to do genetically comes from the bacteria in our gut. Now, if that's true, and it is, you want the right bacteria in the gut, not the wrong one, not the wrong ones.
How about hormonal cycles in women during their monthly cycles?
And what?
Well, I just know that when I was getting started, I was frequently embarrassed by women telling me that getting on a nutritional supplement was balancing out their month at a significant difference to what it was before. Did you have any experience with that in your practice?
Well, I do. I would say anecdotally, people that use the USANA product sometimes overcome infertility just by doing that. So it's clearly doing something hormonally, but it's not been studied, so I can't say much more beyond that. A lot of, there's like one of the little slides I made at the beginning was that the body naturally fixes itself. It naturally puts itself back into balance if you can control chronic stress. If you can control chronic stress from all sources, it will be back in balance. So most of the time, we're kind of pecking around the edges and not really dealing with the core issues of stress. And tonight we just addressed the nutritional reasons for the chronic stress response to be turned on. And when our biome is out of whack, you have turned on the chronic stress response in your body. There's no way to turn it off if your biome is out of whack. You can do all the other stuff you want to do to try to mitigate some of the damage, but you can't turn it off. You can't be back into balance. So the more everything is in balance, the more the body works the way it's supposed to. Not 100% of the time, but that's, you know, our bodies are wonderfully self-regulating if we'll let them do it, and just eat the right foods to let them do it.
Bill?
So you eat organic, grass-fed, free range. Do you ever eat out?
Twice a year. And one of the places only serves what I just described to you. That's on their menu. They describe all of the sources. They can describe the farm where the food came from. The whole restaurant is set up with that spiel. And the other times at Red Lobster, because somebody gives me a free meal ticket.
Any other questions?
How about like Tylenol, ibuprofen, that type of stuff?
Tylenol and ibuprofen.
All of the non-steroidal drugs severely disrupt the biome. So ibuprofen would fall into that category. Tylenol would be less damaging to the biome. So the chronic use of non-steroidal drugs is definitely damaging to the biome.
Chronic use is definitely, okay. Do you have any questions? I know you were talking about some back pain. Is that inflammation or is that injury?
That was injury.
Injury.
Yeah, that was more herniated disc.
Okay. Okay, mildly herniated disc in the back. What would you suggest for somebody there? Does any of this you're speaking of play into something like that?
Well, I've had 3 different times in my life where I've had an injury that herniated a disc, and the last time I herniated 4 of them. So yeah, it speaks to me a lot. So part of my journey has been trying to discover how to be well in spite of the pain. And so these things are not just theoretical to me. These are things that I have attempted to discover. How can I be healthy with what I'm living with? And one of the things I live with is chronic pain. So how can I do different things. And so we focused on the nutritional part of it. And the nutritional supplement part of it is a huge part of controlling inflammation, the inflammation going on with injuries. So I didn't focus on that very much, but that's a big part of it. But there are other things in emotional health and spiritual health that play a huge role in the modulation of chronic stress. And all of those things I attempt to integrate personally to try to control the pain that I live with. But I don't take anti-inflammatories except in extreme need because they do mess my body up.
Okay. Anybody else?
Finding a really good physical therapist and a good trainer is very, very important for somebody with that kind of a back injury. This is very difficult to take care of on a do-it-yourself. If you don't have the training for knowing exactly what exercises to do and how to do them, finding somebody that can guide you that's really huge, because you can't fix it just by these things. You need to get the muscles right, the strength right, balancing your body right. Those things help a lot. So I don't want to pretend that just eating the right things is going to make your back pain go away, because it won't. But it's part of it. It's part of the body's self-healing. Even your back has self-healing systems that are somewhat turned on, and they're attempting to fix it. If they are allowed to, they continue to work at it.
Anybody else? Got it? Well, Doc, you want to hang? I'm just going to wrap up real quick before you say bye. Thank you. First of all, thanks. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to share this information with people again. I mean, you guys find this beneficial? Is this something that maybe you would consider coming to again or bringing?